Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
Well, it seems the news these days doesn't often contain good news, but we got some. Damon passed it along to me, and I also saw it posted in a few other places. But I've been telling you that if they wanted to, they could stop those stupid robocalls. Now, I've had people say, Steve, recently it seems robocalls have dropped off. And it's possible in your world, but not in mine. I still get them on my desk phone all day long, and I get them on my cell phone from time to time as well. So this is from the Justice Department at justice.gov. Yes, they've got a website, and it's a press release for immediate release, and it came out Friday. District Court orders injunctions against two telecom carriers who facilitated hundreds of millions of fraudulent robocalls to consumers in the United States. This is the first of their kind injunctions obtained by the Justice Department. The U.S. District Court, Eastern District of New York, entered two orders separately, barring 8 individuals and entities from continuing to facilitate the transmission of massive volumes of fraudulent robocalls to consumers in the U.S. This is from the DOJ, and I understand this is not going to stop all calls, but it'll stop some calls, and it'll also make the other people who are still doing the calls stop for a split second and look and realize that, hey, they got them. What if I'm next? In one of the matters, U.S. versus Palumbo, the district court entered a preliminary injunction that bars 2 individuals and 2 entities from operating as intermediate voice over internet protocol carriers during the pendency of the civil action. In the other matter, which is U.S. versus Cahen et al., the district court entered consent decrees that permanently bar an individual and 3 entities from operating as intermediate VoIP carriers conveying any telephone calls into the U.S. telephone system. So one of the things I've had people tell me, the skeptics, they say, Steve, these are all voice over internet protocol calls. These are all VoIP calls, and therefore they can't be stopped. These massive robocall fraud schemes target telephones of residents across our country, many of whom are elderly or otherwise potentially vulnerable to such schemes. They leave out the fact that it ticks off people like us, okay? This is Assistant Attorney General Jody Hunt of the DOJ's Civil Division. The department is committed to stopping unlawful conduct and pursuing those who knowingly facilitate these schemes for their own financial gain. This office will take all appropriate measures to stop fraudulent robocalling schemes responsible for causing catastrophic losses to victims, including seeking to permanently shut down the U.S.-based enablers of such schemes. So I understand people go, well, Steve, the calls start in India. There's nothing we can do. Yeah, the calls start in India, and somehow they get into America, okay? So U.S. Attorney Richard P. Donahue said, protecting elderly and vulnerable individuals from being conned by foreign call center scammers remains a priority. You don't need to keep dressing us up and saying we're protecting these people or these. Protect everybody, dude. Okay? Seriously. Stop saying that we're doing it to protect the elderly or the needy or the fragile. No. All of America is annoyed by this. You can just say we're doing this to protect Americans. If I have any complaints with this story, it's that. You don't need to couch this. As alleged in the complaints, the defendants in both cases operated as VoIP carriers, receiving internet-based calls from other entities, often abroad, and transmitting those calls first to other carriers within the U.S. and ultimately to the phones of individuals like you and me. Numerous foreign-based call centers are alleged to have used the defendants' VoIP carrier services to pass fraudulent government and business imposter robocalls to victims in the U.S. And they knew what they were doing, obviously. The defendants also sold U.S. phone numbers to foreign entities, which were used as victim callback numbers as part of a massive robocalling fraud scheme. As also alleged, the defendants were warned numerous times that they were carrying fraudulent robocalls. And again, I've had people say, Steve, they don't know they're carrying. Yes, they do. Okay. And many of these were, of course, spoofing the Social Security Administration, the IRS, and legitimate businesses such as Microsoft. Microsoft alert. Your system is infected with bugs. Microsoft alert. Many of the robocalls were made by foreign fraudsters impersonating government investigators. Yes, your car has been found near the Mexican border with fire and drugs and social security numbers. You have been suspended. Call this number. The court's decision sends a clear message to gateway carriers who knowingly do business with scammers targeting Americans from overseas. This is the Inspector General for the Social Security Administration speaking. We will continue to pursue those who facilitate these scam calls by allowing them into the U.S. telephone network. I want to thank the DOJ for its support. In the first case, the district court issued a preliminary injunction against spouses, Mr. and Mrs. Palumbo of Scottsdale, Arizona, and the Arizona companies that they own and operate, E-Commerce National LLC, doing business as tollfreedeals.com, and SIP Retail, doing business as sipretail.com. The district court held in a written opinion that the evidence presented by the U.S. demonstrated probable cause to conclude that the defendants were engaged in widespread patterns of telecommunications fraud intended to deprive call recipients in the Eastern District of New York and elsewhere of money and property. So again, they took the action in the Eastern District of New York, so they had to allege that it happened there, so they found victims there. But obviously, this is happening nationwide. The preliminary injunction issued by the court bars those defendants from carrying any VoIP calls destined for phones in the U.S. and providing any U.S. telephone numbers to any individuals or entities during the pendency of this litigation. The court noted that though defendants had been warned more than 100 times of specific instances of fraudulent calls being transmitted through their network, they never severed their business relationship with any entity they learned was associated with fraudulent call traffic prior to the filing of this lawsuit. And I've said that before, that they know they're just making too much money. And I've had people say, oh, Steve, they don't know. How do they know what kind of phone calls are being made? They simply provide the services. The court further noted that the telecommunications intermediary industry is set up perfectly to allow fraudulent operators to rotate telephone numbers endlessly and blame other parties for the fraudulent call traffic they carry. The United States demonstrated probable cause to conclude that defendants' business is permeated with fraud. Permeated with fraud. That multiple individual victims in the U.S. suffered significant fraud losses, and that every day that the defendants' actions in this vein continue, the public is at risk of harm in the form of additional high-dollar fraud losses. The claims in this case, of course, are allegations only. There's not been any final determination of liability or wrongdoing. So, we'll see what happens in court, but this is a huge first step. These cases are being handled by trial attorneys of the Civil Division's Consumer Protection Branch, and also of attorneys from the U.S. Attorney's Office, the Eastern District of New York, in coordination with the Social Security Administration Office, the Postal Inspection Service, and they're getting investigative support from the U.S. Treasury Inspector General, and also other, because that's one of the ways they do this is they pose and they spoof numbers to make it look like they're the IRS calling you. Okay, this is the Social Security Administration calling you. This is the FBI calling you. And I'm surprised it took them this long. And that's one of the reasons I was so upset by this, is they could have done this years ago. They could have. They're just doing it now. Additional information about the Consumer Protection Branch and its enforcement efforts may be found at a website that's cited in this press release. For more information about this, you can visit their website also, blah, blah, blah. And in case you're curious, the year 2020 marks the 150th anniversary of the Department of Justice. That's a lot of candles to put on the cake, my friends. But they're finally doing something good here about robocalls. And again, this isn't going to stop all of them. This might not even stop many of them. This might just stop a portion of them. But the point is that you need to start doing stuff like this, shutting down the bad actors, because the people who are doing this and making the money from it, they know where the money's coming from. They know. And yes, they can stop it. The technology is there. And every time I put up a video, I get one or two people who go, Steve, you don't know what you're talking about. And I get an email from somebody who goes, I'm in the telecommunications industry, and you don't know what you're talking about. And then I get dozens from people in the telecommunications industry who say, Steve, you are right on. Absolutely. We could stop this if we wanted to, referring to other people in the industry. But they're not, obviously not all bad actors. There's just a couple bad actors. And they know who they are. Everyone knows who they are. But they're making so much money that they're not going to stop. And until somebody gets the gumption and the will to make it stop, nothing happens. So finally, somebody did something. Okay? But of course, like I said, this is just a press release. A preliminary injunction has been entered against these different VoIP providers. And of course, like everything else, these are mere allegations. But the point is that the judge granted an injunction based on what appears to be a lot of evidence suggesting that the lawsuits filed have a lot of merit to them. Normally, you can't get an injunction like that unless you can prove that in a very, very early stage of the case. So I'll put a link to the press release below. You can read it yourself. But like I said, it is finally, that right there, my friends, is a symbol for frustration finally being taken care of, at least in some small respect. Questions or comments, put them below. Otherwise, I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. On a good day, it's me and my computer against the world. On a bad day, it's me against my computer.